I was frozen, just staring at my phone screen. Right there, my own face, circled in a vicious red scrawl, like a target at a shooting gallery. And underneath, my daughter-in-law had asked her thousands of followers, if you had to get rid of one burden to make your family more perfect, who would you choose? My heart just shattered. Then the phone rang, and it wasn't a call of comfort. It was my own son telling me off. "Mom," he said, "it was just a joke. You're overreacting. My name is Judith Miller. I'm 70, 2 years old, from Naperville, Illinois. And this is the story of how that joke lit a fire under a war they never ever saw coming. If my story strikes a chord with you, perhaps you'll consider sharing your own story in the comments, because every one of our voices deserves to be heard." It all really started at the 45th birthday party for Michael, my only son. The party was at that beautiful colonial house in the quiet suburbs, the one his father, George, and I poured our life savings into buying for them, outright, 15 years ago. We just wanted them to have a solid start. Of course, now, everyone just thinks of it as Michael and Amber's house. For a long time, even I tricked myself into believing it, just to keep the peace in the family. That afternoon, the air was thick with fake laughter and the expensive perfume of my daughter-in-law Amber's influencer friends. Amber, she was poured into this emerald green silk dress, and she just glided through the crowd like a queen in her own kingdom. She always had a knack for that, turning everything that wasn't hers into her own personal stage. I was sitting in the armchair in a corner of the living room, feeling like an old piece of furniture, completely out of place amid all the sleek, modern flash Amber had coated the house in. That armchair was one of the few things left from my time with George, and I have a sneaky suspicion she only kept it to highlight how dated I was. Sophia and Liam, my grandkids, they're the lights of my life in gatherings like these. They'd run over to me every now and then, stuff a piece of cake in my hand, or tell me some silly, rambling joke. But just as quickly, Amber would call them away to say hello to so-and-so or let's get a picture. I understood what she was doing. It was her way of controlling the narrative, making sure all the attention stayed on that perfect little nuclear family she was working so hard to build. The family photo shoot happened in the backyard, under the bougainvillea trellis that George and I had planted with our own 2 hands. "Mother Judith, could you stand just over here?" Amber said, pointing to the very edge of the group. Her voice was sweet as pie, but it was an order. Not Mom, mind you. Mother Judith. A clear, sharp line drawn in the sand. I quietly moved to where she pointed, watching her arrange Michael and the kids in the center. Michael, tilt your head. Sophia, big smile. Liam, put the phone away. She directed it all like a movie director. When she looked over at me, she just let out this heavy sigh, as if my very presence was a flaw in her perfect picture that she just couldn't fix. The final photo, I have to admit, was beautiful. Michael looked handsome, the children were angelic, and Amber was just glowing with satisfaction. I stood off to the side, smiling. It was maybe a little forced, but it was a genuine smile. At that moment, I had no idea that this picture, this seemingly warm family moment, was about to become the weapon my daughter-in-law would use to stab me right in the heart. 1, 2, it took me 2 days to see it. I'm not what you'd call tech-savvy, but I have a social media account to keep up with old friends and see pictures of the grandkids. That evening, as I was scrolling through photos from the party, I stopped dead on Amber's post. It was our family picture, but something was different. A crudely drawn, but vicious red circle was wrapped tightly around my face. Below it was the caption, "Little family game. If you could remove one piece of baggage to make the family more perfect, who would you choose? I think we all know my choice. Number family goals, number perfect life, number no baggage." My whole world just stopped turning. Number no baggage. I read it over and over. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I scrolled down to the comments, and each one felt like a tiny needle piercing my skin. "Definitely the old lady. Why is she even in the picture?" Amber had replied with a crying, laughing emoji. "Time for the nursing home, Amber," Amber answered with a string of heart emojis. "Your family would be perfect without that extra part." To which Amber commented, "You get me." Every comment, every emoji from her, felt like a hammer blow to my chest. She wasn't just agreeing with them, She was cheering them on, enjoying this public humiliation. The shame, the pain, and the anger that I had swallowed for 15 years suddenly boiled over. I wasn't Judith, the calm history teacher, anymore. I wasn't the mother and grandmother who always smoothed things over. In that moment, I was just a woman who had been betrayed and attacked, and I was not going to sit back and take it. A surge of pure rage got me to my feet. I didn't cry. The tears felt like they'd been burned away by the fire in my chest. I grabbed my car keys, didn't even bother to change out of my house clothes, just threw on a sweater and bolted out the door. I had no plan, no clear thought in my head. My entire being was running on a single command: confront her, make her answer for this cruelty. The car flew through the night, the streetlights streaking past the window in a blur. I drove to that house, my house. When I pulled up to the curb, I didn't turn off the engine. I just sat there for a moment, looking at the lit-up windows. Inside, they were living their perfect life, built on my sacrifices, and now, on my dignity. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. Enough. It was well and truly enough. I got out and slammed the door, the sound cracking through the quiet neighborhood. I didn't go to the front door. I went straight to the side door into the kitchen, the one I'd always used when I lived here. I didn't knock. Why should I knock to get into my own home? I pushed the door open. Amber was standing at the kitchen island, a glass of wine in one hand, scrolling on her phone with a smile on her face. That smile vanished when she saw me. Surprise flickered in her eyes, quickly replaced by annoyance. "Mother Judith, what are you doing here at this hour?" Her voice was a little startled, but she tried to keep that superior tone. I didn't answer her. I walked right up to her and held up my phone, the screen still glowing with her toxic post. My voice shook with fury, but it was clear and sharp, echoing in the cold, renovated kitchen. "Amber, what is this? You explain this travesty to me right now." Amber glanced at the screen, then back at me. A smug, shameless smirk spread across her lips. She took a sip of her wine, acting disgustingly calm. "Oh, Judith, why are you so worked up?" she said, her tone like she was talking to a pouting child. "It's just a silly joke for the internet. Everyone does it. You're being too sensitive." "Fun?" I nearly screamed, a scream that had been bottled up for years. "You find my humiliation fun? You make me a laughingstock for the whole world to see, and you call that fun?" "I didn't think it was that serious," she shrugged, and her indifference hurt more than the insults. "My friends all thought it was hilarious." "I don't care what your friends think." I took another step forward, closing the distance between us. "I care that my daughter-in-law is publicly insulting me in the very house I bought for you." That phrase, "in the very house I bought," seemed to hit a nerve. The calm facade disappeared, replaced by anger. "Here we go again with the house. Can you ever let that go? We've lived here for 15 years. We've put so much work into this place. It's our house." "It's your house because I allowed it," I shot back. "And my kindness is not a license for you to walk all over me." Our argument grew louder. We were lost in it. And that's when Michael came home. My son walked into a war zone. He looked at me, then at Amber, his face just weary and drained. Amber, like a professional actress, instantly changed her tune. The hard edge vanished, her eyes welled up, and she ran to Michael's arm, her voice breaking into a sob. "Honey, look at your mother," she whimpered. "I just posted a funny family photo, and she's making a huge scene. She came here screaming at me. I don't even know what I did wrong." I just stood there, stunned by the blatant performance. I looked at Michael, my son, the boy I raised, expecting him to see through this charade. I expected him to defend me. But Michael, after a long day at work and always looking for the path of least resistance, just looked at me with tired eyes. He let out a heavy sigh, the same one I'd heard 100 times whenever Amber and I had a disagreement, and then he said the words that killed the last piece of my mother's heart. "Mom, it was just a joke. Don't overreact." Just one sentence, 11 words. But they carried the weight of a lifetime of disappointment. It wasn't just him defending Amber. It was a complete dismissal of my pain. It was a confirmation that, in my son's eyes, my feelings didn't matter. My hurt was just me making a mountain out of a molehill. It was the final cut, severing the last, fragile thread that connected us. 3. The fire in me suddenly went out, leaving only cold ash. I stared at Michael, at the son I once loved more than life itself. His face was a stranger's. I no longer saw the little boy who used to trail after me in the kitchen. I only saw a man, a husband standing by his wife, and an accomplice in the hurting of his own mother. I didn't say another word. What was the point of arguing? What was the point of explaining when he so clearly didn't want to understand? I just quietly turned and walked out of the kitchen. Amber's triumphant voice followed me. "See? I told you. She's always like this." I didn't look back. I walked out of that house, through a door I would never again walk through uninvited. I sat in my car, the silence so loud it was nearly deafening. I didn't drive home right away. I sat there, in the dark, looking at that brightly lit house. And then the memories, the pieces of 15 years of biting my tongue, began to flood back, clearer and more painful than ever before. The drive from their house to my apartment isn't long, but that night, it felt like a century. Every streetlight, every turn was a stop on a painful trip down memory lane. I remember the day Michael and his wife moved into that house like it was yesterday, 15 years ago. Michael had just gotten a promotion, but with student loans, money was still tight. Amber had just quit her job to get ready for Sophia's arrival. They were crammed into a tiny apartment, always complaining about the rent. George, my husband, was still with me then. We had just gotten a small inheritance from his mother. George said to me, "Honey, what if we help the kids with a down payment?" But I was thinking bigger. "No, George," I said. "A down payment means they'll still be saddled with a mortgage." 4. What if we just buy a house for them? They can pay us a symbolic rent, just enough to cover the property taxes. When they're on their feet, we'll sign the deed over to them. George looked at me with that trusting way he always did. "You always think of the boy." And so we did it. We took nearly all our life savings, plus that inheritance, and bought that house. The day we gave Michael the keys, he hugged me so tight and his voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mom. I will never, for the rest of my life, forget what you and Dad have done for us." Amber just smiled, a smile I thought was happiness back then. Looking back now, I can see the victory in it. The car stopped at a red light. I stared at the glowing red, and it reminded me of the paint Amber chose for the living room. About 10 years ago, not long after George had passed, I stopped by and was shocked to find the whole living room, which had been a warm, buttery yellow that George and I picked out, had been repainted a cold, sterile gray. The furniture was all different too. George's armchair was shoved in a corner. Our family photos were replaced with meaningless abstract art. I had asked Amber gently, "Why did you repaint without asking me?" And she gave that familiar laugh and said, "Oh, I just wanted to modernize the place a little, Mother Judith. This color is very trendy now. It'll be better for you when you have your friends over. It looks more sophisticated." I looked to Michael for backup. My son just nodded. "Amber has a good eye, Mom. Don't worry about it. Better for you. Don't worry." They always used those lines to justify their actions, twisting their selfishness into concern for me. They were erasing my memories and telling me it was for my own good. The light turned green. I pressed the gas. The car passed a park where I used to take Sophia and Liam for walks. Another memory surfaced. About 5 years ago, when the kids started school, I had offered to pick them up a few afternoons a week so Michael and Amber could have more time for work. Amber refused. "Oh no, Mom, you're getting older. It's too much trouble for you. We'll just hire someone. It's more convenient." Convenient. But then I'd see her posting pictures of herself at the spa or out shopping with friends on the very afternoons she was supposedly too busy. When I asked Michael about it, he just sighed. "She needs her own space to de-stress, Mom. Taking care of 2 kids is exhausting." I wanted to scream, "What about me? Don't I need space with my grandchildren?" But I stayed quiet. I always stayed quiet. I was afraid of the arguments. I was afraid of putting Michael in a difficult position. I was afraid the distance between me and my grandchildren would grow even wider, and my silence became my consent, giving Amber the green light to push me further and further away. Now, driving alone in the dark, the harsh truth hit me. Michael was never in a difficult position. He had made his choice. He had always chosen to side with his wife. Every time he said, "Don't worry, Mom," or "You're thinking too much." It wasn't comfort, it was a demand for my silence and acceptance. He chose the false peace of his little family over justice for his own mother. I finally reached my apartment building. I pulled into my usual spot. I sat in the car for a little while longer. I looked up at my small apartment, the only window lit up in the whole building. This was my real home, a small, humble place, but it was mine. No one could repaint the walls on a whim here. No one could push me to the edge of the frame. That profound disappointment inside me began to cool, to harden into something else, something sharper and colder. It was resolve. They had mistaken my patience for weakness. They had taken my love for granted. They were wrong. They had underestimated a history teacher. History taught me that no empire lasts forever, and that every revolution begins with one final, unbearable act of oppression. Amber's post wasn't a joke. It was a declaration of war. 5. And I, Judith Miller, 72 years old, was going to accept it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my writing desk, under the warm lamplight, and I began to draw up my battle plan. The next morning, streaks of dawn cut through the blinds of my apartment window. I hadn't slept a wink, but I didn't feel tired. The rage and hurt from the night before had condensed into something else, a cold, focused energy. My mind felt strangely clear, as if a thick fog that had clouded it for years had finally lifted. I made a pot of Earl Grey tea, the scent of bergamot calming my nerves. I was no longer the heartbroken mother or the wounded grandmother. I was Judith Miller, history teacher, a woman who understands that you don't win a war with emotion alone. You need a strategy, you need intelligence, and most importantly, you need undeniable proof. My plan began to take shape. My greatest weapon was the house itself. But to use that weapon effectively, I needed a full understanding of my battlefield. That meant I had to review all my finances, every document, every asset that George and I had built together. It was time for a full audit, not just of my assets, but of the trust that had been stolen. I sat down at my old oak desk, a wedding anniversary gift from George. This desk was where I'd planned my lessons, graded papers, and later, where George organized our family's paperwork. Our whole life was documented and stored right here. I pulled open the bottom drawer and took out a heavy metal document box. On it was a neatly written label in George's handwriting, Family Finances. Taking a deep breath, I opened the box. The smell of old paper and memories washed over me, but today, I wouldn't allow myself to drown in it. The first document I looked at was the deed to the house. My name, Judith Miller, was there, clear and singular. A small wave of relief washed over me. At least my foundation was solid. Next came the investment portfolios, the savings accounts. Everything seemed to be in order. George was a meticulous man, and I had tried to maintain that diligence after he passed. And then, I saw a neatly clipped stack of recent credit card bills in the corner. I usually just glanced at the total and wrote a check, a habit born of trust, and the belief that my life was simple, with no surprises. But not today. Today, I was going to read every single line. I unfolded last month's statement. My eyes, which now need reading glasses, squinted at the tiny print. The electric bill, the gas bill, groceries, a few books from Barnes & Noble. It was all familiar, until I stopped on one line item. Glow and Glam Spa, $150. A spa? I've never been to a spa in my life. A warm foot soak with some Epsom salts is about as luxurious as I get. Maybe I forgot? A flicker of fear entered my mind. Amber's words echoed in my ears, that I was sensitive, that I was overreacting. Was I getting old? Was my memory really failing? Was I imagining all of this? That self-doubt lasted only a few seconds. No, I knew for a fact I had never spent $150 at a place called Glow and Glam. I flipped to the statement from the month before. Another strange charge. Luxe Style Box, monthly subscription, $49.99. A luxury style box? I looked down at my flannel housecoat and almost laughed out loud. It was ridiculous. The suspicion in my gut began to grow, turning into a cold dread that crept up my spine. This wasn't a mistake. With trembling hands, I opened my laptop, the one Sophia had helped me set up. It took me a few minutes to remember the password for my online bank account, a place I rarely visited. I clicked on the credit card statements and began to travel back in time, month after month, year after year. And that's when I saw it. A sophisticated web of deceit woven from small, insignificant purchases. Small enough to fly under the radar of the bank's fraud detection, and small enough for a trusting old woman like me to overlook. It started 2 years ago. The first charges were tiny. A couple of dollars for a photo editing app on a phone. A few dozen for an Uber ride to a shopping mall in a suburb I'd never even been to. Then, slowly, the charges got bigger and more frequent. October 2 years ago, net-porter.com, $250. I had to Google the name to learn it was a designer clothing website. December of that same year, a series of small charges at fancy coffee shops in downtown Chicago, the very places Amber often boasted about on her social media, where she was having important business meetings. Last year, a monthly membership to a high-end gym. Charges for food delivery from those expensive restaurants. And then there were the Amazon purchases. Things I'd never order, delivered to an address I didn't even recognize. I kept scrolling, my hand trembling on the mouse. Every line on those statements was a fresh cut to my trust. She had been doing this right under my nose for 2 solid years. She had been living a life of luxury on my dime, all while playing the part of the dutiful daughter-in-law and successful online businesswoman. The glamour she paraded online, the clothes, the meals, the trips, it was all funded by my silence and my trust. A wave of nausea rose in my throat. This wasn't just stealing money. This was a systematic humiliation. She had turned me into a secret, unwitting sponsor for her fake lifestyle. The anger inside me was no longer red hot like the night before. It had turned to a block of ice, cold, hard, and sharp. I opened a spreadsheet and began to meticulously enter every single fraudulent charge I found. The final number popped up in the corner of the screen, blinking cruelly. 8,432 美元, 17美分. Over $8,000. That number stared back at me. It wasn't enough to bankrupt me, but it represented something so much bigger than money. It was the price tag on 2 years of being deceived. It was the cost of the trips I didn't take, the gifts I didn't buy my grandchildren, the peace of mind I should have had at this age. The betrayal now had a concrete form. It wasn't some vague post on social media anymore. It was a number, a cold, undeniable piece of evidence. My son could call my pain a joke, but could he call this number a joke? I printed out all the statements, using a red marker to circle every fraudulent charge. The stack of paper grew thicker and thicker. I organized them into a neat pile. This would be the first bullet in my war. Just then, my phone rang. The name Amber flashed on the screen. My heart skipped a beat. The timing was almost cosmic. Maybe, just maybe, she was calling to apologize, to beg for forgiveness after having a change of heart. A tiny flicker of hope, the last remnant of the mother in me, sparked to life. I took a deep breath, steadied my voice, and answered the call. Hello, Mother Judith, it's me. Amber's voice on the other end was sickeningly sweet, the voice she always used when she wanted something. I was just calling to see if you'd calm down. About last night, I'm just so sorry you were upset. Michael and I were talking and he's really worried about you. Oh, is that so? I said, my voice colder than I expected. You two are worried about me? Of course, she continued, her confidence returning. Michael said you've been a little stressed lately. He thinks maybe you should get more rest. You didn't seem well last night. I heard the narrative they were building. Not well. Stressed. They were starting to paint the picture of a doddering old woman who overreacts. I tightened my grip on the pen in my hand. I am perfectly well, Amber. In fact, my mind has never been clearer. I've just spent the entire morning reviewing my finances. There was a short pause on the other end of the line. Your finances? Is something wrong? Nothing major, I said nonchalantly. I was just looking over my credit statements and noticed a few strange charges. Must be some kind of mistake. For instance, there's a rather large fee here from the Glow and Glam Spa. I was just about to call the bank to report a fraudulent charge. The silence this time was longer. I could hear Amber's sharp intake of breath. When she spoke again, the sweetness was gone, replaced by a stammer. The spa? The spa? Oh. You know, I might have borrowed your card by mistake at some point and forgotten. I've been so forgetful lately. A clumsy lie. Too late, dear girl. You walked right into it. I smiled, a smile she couldn't see. Borrowed it by mistake? For 2 straight years, Amber? To the tune of over $8,000? That's not forgetfulness anymore. The other end of the line went completely silent. I could picture her face, the smugness melting into panic, her perfect tan turning pale. I had her. I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't give her the chance to spin another lie. This wasn't a mistake, Amber, I said, my voice now full of authority, the voice of a teacher reprimanding a student who hadn't done their homework. This was a habit, and this habit is about to end. With that, I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down in anger. I just gently placed it back in its cradle. The first battle was over, and I had won. The feeling wasn't triumph. It was a cold, grim relief. I had my proof. I had confirmed the true face of my enemy, and I had let her know that I knew. I looked at the stack of papers on my desk. It wasn't just evidence of theft anymore. It was an indictment of 15 years of deception and manipulation. The next step was clear. I needed an ally, someone who could turn this evidence into a legal weapon. I picked up the phone again. This time, I searched my contacts for a name I hadn't called in a long, long time. The next morning, I drove to downtown Chicago. This trip felt different from the times I usually came to the city for a concert or a museum visit. Today, I was here for a war. Samuel Harrison's office was on the 34th floor of a glass and steel skyscraper overlooking the vast expanse of Lake Michigan. George and Samuel had been the best of friends since college. They fished together, watched football together, and built their careers from the ground up together. After George passed, Samuel would call to check in every now and then, but in my grief and my desire for a quiet life, I had let the connection fade. Now, I was coming to him not as an old friend, but as a client in need. Samuel's office wasn't flashy. It was furnished with dark mahogany, worn leather armchairs, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with thick legal volumes. The place had an air of quiet dignity and wisdom, just like its owner. Samuel, at 75, was still a commanding presence. His hair was completely white, but his eyes, behind a pair of tortoiseshell glasses, were as sharp and perceptive as ever. He greeted me with a gentle hug and a sad smile. "Judith, it's been too long. I'm so sorry it's under these circumstances." He had heard the strain in my voice when I called him the day before. "Thank you, Sam," I said, taking a seat in the chair across from his desk. "I wish I were here just to buy you a cup of coffee." He sat down, lacing his fingers together. "Well, tell me, what is the strongest woman I know so worried?" And so I told him. I told him everything. I started with the social media post, the vicious red circle, the cruel comments, and Michael's dismissal. My voice remained steady, but as I recounted the story, the hurt and humiliation rose up like a quiet tide. Samuel listened without interruption, his expression growing more and more grim. Then, I placed the carefully marked stack of credit card statements on the desk between us. "And this, Sam, this is part 2 of the story." He put on his reading glasses and carefully went through the pages, one by one. The silence in the office was broken only by the rustle of paper and his occasional soft sigh. When he finished the last page, he leaned back in his chair, took off his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Good heavens, Judith," he said, his voice low. "This isn't just a family spat. This is fraud. This Amber, she's broken the law." "I know," I replied, my voice firm. "And that's not all, Sam. I want my house back." Samuel looked at me, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "The house? Are you sure, Judith? That's a very big step. It won't just be a legal battle. It will be an all-out family war. It could destroy your relationship with Michael completely." I looked him straight in the eye without a hint of hesitation. "Sam, that relationship is already destroyed. It was destroyed the night my son chose to side with the wife who humiliated me and called my pain a joke. I have nothing left to lose. I just want back what is mine." Samuel nodded slowly. He understood. He got up and walked to the window, looking out at the bustling city below. "All right, Judith. If this is what you're set on, I'm with you. Legally, you're on solid ground. The house is in your name. There's no formal lease agreement. They are, in essence, living there on your goodwill. We can start with a formal notice, demanding they vacate the premises in 30 days. Do it, I said. Draft it today. The letter from the law offices of Harrison and Associates was sent by certified mail and arrived at the Naperville house 2 days later. I imagined the moment Amber or Michael signed for it, the confusion at seeing a law firm's logo, and the shock as they read the contents. I didn't have to wait long. That evening, my phone began ringing off the hook. First, it was Michael. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear his voice. I knew it would be a mix of pleading, blaming, and excuses. Next, Amber called. I did the same. She left a furious, profanity-laced voicemail that I won't repeat here. Finally, Michael called again. This time, I decided to face it. I took a breath, steeled myself, and answered. "What the hell are you doing, Mom?" were the first words out of his mouth. No greeting, his voice a cocktail of panic and anger. A letter from a lawyer, demanding we move out in 30 days? Have you lost your mind? No, Michael, I haven't lost my mind, I replied, my own voice surprisingly calm. I am perfectly lucid, more lucid than I've been in years. This is our home. We've lived here for 15 years. Sophia and Liam grew up here. You can't just throw us out on the street, he yelled into the phone. Oh, but I can, Michael, because it is my home. A fact you both seem to have forgotten. You took my kindness for granted. You treated this house as your own, so much so that your wife felt entitled to secretly use my money to fund her extravagant lifestyle. There was a pause on his end. He knew about the credit cards. Amber must have confessed after my call. That was a misunderstanding, he stammered. Amber, she'll pay you back, we'll pay you back. You don't have to do this. A misunderstanding, Michael? Over $8,000 in 2 years is a misunderstanding? No, son, that was a choice. And now, I am making my choice. You have 30 days. You can't do this to us, he pleaded, his voice now desperate. Where would we go? You're destroying your own family. I'm not destroying it, I said, echoing the words I'd spoken to Samuel. You two already did that, when you chose deceit over honesty, when you chose your wife over your mother. Goodbye, Michael. I hung up before he could say another word. My hand was shaking, but there was a sense of relief in my heart. The confrontation was over. The line had been drawn. There was no going back. But I had underestimated Amber's audacity and Michael's weakness. A few days later, I received a letter in response, not from a law firm, but a typed letter sent directly from them. It was a mixture of self-victimization and veiled threats. They wrote that they had invested so much sweat and equity into the home, that they had long-term residence rights, and that my actions were the petty and cruel retaliation of a lonely old woman. That last line was a knife, twisted in the wound, but the part that truly stunned me was a single underlined sentence at the bottom. We're not going anywhere, just you try and make us. The brazen challenge both infuriated and worried me. What were they thinking? What gave them this confidence? I called Samuel immediately. Sam, they're refusing to leave. They're daring me. I expected this, Judith, he said, his voice calm. It's a common tactic. They're trying to stall and wear you down. Don't worry, we'll proceed to the next step. We will file a formal eviction with the courts. But something about their confidence felt wrong. It was more than just stubbornness. It was as if they were holding some kind of ace up their sleeve that I didn't know about. And then, 2 weeks later, as Samuel and I were preparing the court filings, a real bombshell was dropped. Samuel called me on a Tuesday morning, his voice more tense than I had ever heard it. Judith, you need to sit down. I have some bad news. My heart seized. What is it, Sam? I had my clerk do a final check on the property title at the county recorder's office, just to make sure all our ducks were in a row before filing. And he found something. He hesitated. Judith, there's an active mortgage lien registered against your property. What? I nearly shouted. A mortgage? That's impossible. George and I paid that house off 15 years ago. I don't owe the bank a single penny. I know, Judith. But the records show that 6 months ago, a business loan for $230,000 was issued to a company called Miller Property Solutions, LLC, and the collateral for that loan was your house. My head was spinning. Miller Property Solutions? I'd never heard of it. $230,000? The number was staggering, absurd. But how could they do that? I stammered. I never signed any papers. Samuel's voice grew heavy. Someone signed, Judith. The paperwork has your signature on it. The signature of Judith Miller, property owner. I dropped the phone. The room seemed to tilt. I had to grab the edge of the desk to steady myself. My signature. Someone had forged my signature. And there were only 2 people in the world who would have had access to my original deed, to the papers I kept safely in that metal box, the box I had trustingly left in my old study in that house. Michael and Amber. Their audacity. Their challenge to just you try. It all made sense now. They weren't just being stubborn. They were hiding a crime. They hadn't just stolen a few $1,000s from my credit card. They had turned my home, my life's work with George, into the instrument for a massive fraud. The initial horror was quickly replaced by a rage so cold it chilled me to the bone. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had desecrated George's memory. They had crossed every conceivable line. I picked up the phone and called Samuel back. My voice, when I spoke, had no trace of a tremor. It was frighteningly calm. "Sam," I said, "this isn't about an eviction anymore. Find me the best. A forensic accountant, a handwriting expert. Turn over every stone. I want to know everything. I want to know every single penny they have taken, and I want them to pay." The war had escalated. The legal shield I had raised would now have to become a sword, and I would not stop until justice was served. Samuel's phone call was a thunderclap that shook my already fragile world. A $230,000 mortgage, a shell company named Miller Property Solutions, a forged signature. The scattered pieces spun in my head, forming a horrifying mosaic of systematic deception. My anger was no longer the hot, explosive kind from that first night. It had settled into a glacier, moving silently but with the power to grind mountains into dust. On Samuel's advice, we hired a forensic investigator named Patricia Wells. Patricia was a woman in her 50s with a neat, short haircut, frameless glasses, and a sharp, efficient demeanor. She offered no sympathy, no comforting words. She was interested only in facts, in numbers, and in the trails they leave behind. That professional coldness was exactly what I needed. Our first meeting took place in Samuel's office. I brought the metal box full of documents, my heart as heavy as the box itself. Patricia got to work immediately. She spread the papers across the large conference table, arranging them with scientific precision. She examined every bill, every contract, every statement with intense focus. Samuel and I just sat and watched, like 2 spectators observing a surgeon perform a complex operation. "This signature," Patricia said after a long silence, pointing to the copy of the mortgage agreement Samuel had obtained. She pushed it toward me. "Mrs. Miller, is this your signature?" I looked at the familiar loops and lines of my own name, and yet it felt completely alien. It was close, almost perfect, but something was off. The final stroke of the R in Miller had a slight tremor, a hesitation that I, a teacher who had signed her name thousands upon thousands of times, would never make. "No," I said, my voice firm. "It's very similar, but it's not mine." Patricia nodded, as if she already knew the answer. "I thought so. We'll send it for a full analysis, but I'm quite certain this is a sophisticated forgery. The person who did this had time to practice." Time to practice. That phrase sent a chill down my spine. I pictured Amber or Michael, or maybe both of them, sitting in the study in my house, under the desk lamp, painstakingly tracing my name over and over again, like a student practicing penmanship. The cold, calculated cruelty of it made me shudder. Patricia's investigation lasted nearly a week. With each passing day, another layer of the rotten onion was peeled back, revealing more of the horrifying truth. Patricia and her team traced Miller Property Solutions, LLC. They discovered it was incorporated online just 8 months prior. The registered agent was Michael Miller. The registered address was my own house. They had turned my home into the headquarters for their phantom company. The money from the $230,000 loan was wired into the company's business account. From there, it was funneled in multiple directions. A large portion went to pay off credit card debt cards we later discovered Amber had secretly opened in Michael's name. Another portion funded lavish vacations, expensive dinners, and the designer goods Amber so frequently flaunted on her social media. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Samuel, with the gut instinct of a seasoned lawyer, had asked Patricia to look closely at George's estate documents, specifically the trust funds. My husband had been a man of foresight. He didn't just leave assets to me and Michael. He had carefully established 2 separate trusts for our grandchildren, Sophia and Liam, for the sole purpose of funding their college educations. I was the trustee, and according to the will, the money could only be touched when the children turned 18, or for a specific educational emergency with my written consent. Mrs. Miller, Patricia called me on a Friday afternoon, her voice holding an unusual urgency. I think you should come down to the office. Mr. Harrison and I have something you need to see. The air in the room was heavy when I arrived. Samuel looked 10 years older. Patricia wore a rare expression of controlled fury. She said nothing, just pushed a stack of account statements from the children's trusts across the table toward me. I picked them up, my hands trembling. And then I saw it. Line after line, starting about a year ago. Regular withdrawals, $5,000 here, $10,000 there. A total of 8 withdrawals over 12 months. $40,000, I whispered, unable to believe my eyes. They took $40,000. Precisely, Samuel said, his voice hoarse. They embezzled from their own children's education funds. But how? I asked, my mind reeling. I'm the trustee. I never signed off on any withdrawals. Patricia flipped to another page. It was a copy of the withdrawal orders, and there, below the request for payment, was a signature. Judith Miller, trustee. Another forgery, but this one hurt 1,000 times more. This wasn't just them stealing from me. This was them stealing from the future of their own innocent children, the 2 little people I loved more than anything. I dropped my head into my hands. A choked sob escaped my chest. For the first time since this war began, I cried. Not from anger, but from a profound, deep-seated sorrow, a soul-crushing disappointment in human nature. How could a father, a mother, do that to their own children? What was that $40,000 for? Handbags? Vacations? What did they use it for? I asked, looking up, my glasses fogged with tears. Patricia took a deep breath. This is the worst part, Judith. We traced the money. It wasn't used for their lifestyle. It was funneled, along with a portion of the mortgage loan, to pay for something else. She pushed another file toward me. This one contained property records, a beachfront vacation condo in Clearwater, Florida, purchased in cash 8 months ago. The owners listed on the deed, Amber Collins and Michael Miller. The room exploded in my vision. They had stolen my money and stolen my grandchildren's future to secretly buy a vacation home. While I was living frugally in my rented apartment, worrying about my bills, they were building their own private paradise on a foundation of dirty money. Amber knew what that fund was for, I said, my voice now a hollow whisper. She was there when George wrote the will. She heard him say, with his own mouth, that this was for Sophia and Liam's future. And she did it anyway. So did Michael, Samuel added, his tone laced with contempt. He's George's son. He knew how hard his father worked to save that money, and he went along with it. Went along with it. That was the key. This wasn't just Amber's scheme. Michael wasn't some manipulated victim. He was an active participant. He knew. He planned it with her, executed it with her. He sold his children's future and his parents' honor for a beach condo and a fantasy life. My tears stopped. A chilling clarity washed over my mind. I understood the full depth of the rot in their souls. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the rush of traffic below. Every car held a life, a story, and my story had now taken a completely different turn. This was no longer a fight over a house or money. This was a fight for justice. Justice for George, justice for Sophia and Liam, and justice for myself. I turned back to face Samuel and Patricia. "What's the next step?" I asked, my voice now devoid of any weakness. Samuel looked at me, a new determination in his eyes. "Judith, with this evidence, we can do more than just evict them. We can go to the authorities. Bank fraud, forgery, felony theft. These are serious federal crimes. They could go to prison." Prison. The word hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. My son Michael, in prison. Amber, too. What would that mean for Sophia and Liam? What would happen to those children if both their parents were incarcerated? A war raged inside me. The mother, the grandmother in me, wanted to stop to give them a chance for the sake of the children. But the other part of me, the part that believed in right and wrong, knew that a crime of this magnitude could not be ignored. If I backed down now, what lesson would I be teaching my grandchildren? That deceit and theft are excusable if it's family? No, I couldn't do that. I don't want them in prison, I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. Unless they give me no other choice. I looked at Samuel. Sam, I want you to draft a new will for me, a very specific new will. Samuel and Patricia exchanged a confused glance. I managed a tired, calculated smile. George taught me that sometimes the best way to win a war isn't to destroy your enemy, but to take away all their weapons and force their surrender. I'm going to give Michael one final choice. A choice between his family and his toxic wife. A choice between a future and a prison cell. The inheritance trap, I said, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something like hope. We're going to set a trap. Leaving Samuel's office that day, I didn't feel victorious or vindicated. I just felt a heavy emptiness. I had the whole truth now, a truth far uglier than I could have ever imagined. I was no longer fighting in the dark. I had seen the face of my enemy, and it pained me to my core that one of them wore the face of my son. The plan I proposed to Samuel was not an act of spontaneous revenge. It was born from the ashes of my love, a final, desperate attempt to salvage what could be salvaged, while still executing justice without compromise. I didn't want to destroy Michael. I wanted to force him to confront the consequences of his own choices, to excise the malignant tumor that was Amber from his own life. Over the next few days, Samuel and I worked tirelessly. His office became our war room. We were no longer talking about eviction. We were building a legal fortress, a perfect trap that, once sprung, would offer no escape. Samuel, with his decades of legal experience, drafted the main clauses. I, with my intimate understanding of my son's psychology, added the subtle details, the sharp psychological blows. This new will, or as I secretly called it, the family judgment, would be our masterpiece. Its terms were, on the surface, simple, yet they were profoundly cruel. First, my entire estate, including the house in Naperville, my current apartment, all investments and savings would not be left to Michael. Instead, everything would be placed into a new, irrevocable trust called the Miller Future Trust. Second, the sole beneficiaries of this trust would be my grandchildren, Sophia and Liam. The funds would be managed by a neutral third-party bank, not me and not Michael, to ensure absolute impartiality. The trust would cover the full cost of their college education, including tuition, board, and books, at any university they chose. After graduation, the remaining principal would be given to them at age 30 as a nest egg to start their own lives. And here was the core, the sharpest blade of the will. Third, Michael Miller, my son, would only receive a portion of the interest from this trust, a modest monthly stipend to live on, under one condition. He must finalize a divorce from Amber Collins within six months of the official reading of this will. If, after 6 months, he was still married to Amber Collins, he would be permanently and irrevocably disinherited, never to receive a single cent. Samuel looked at me after typing that final clause. "Judith, are you sure? It's severe. A court might see this as coercion, an infringement on the freedom to marry." "I'm sure, Sam," I said, my voice unwavering. "This isn't coercion, it's a choice. Michael has the absolute freedom to stay with the woman who helped him defraud his mother and steal from his own children. But that freedom has a price, and that price is his entire family fortune and legacy. I am not interfering in his marriage. I am protecting my assets from a con artist, and if my son chooses the con artist, he must accept the consequences," I continued. "And Sam, add a sealed addendum to the will, one that is only to be opened in the event that Michael and Amber decide to legally contest the will." "An addendum?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Containing what?" "Containing," I said, "Patricia Wells's entire investigative file, All the proof of the credit card fraud, the forged mortgage, and the raided trust fund, along with a sworn statement from me that if they dare to challenge my final wishes, the executor of my will is instructed to turn the entire file over to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Let them know, if they want a war, they will get total war. Samuel looked at me, his expression shifting from surprise to admiration. He said nothing, just nodded and began to type. The trap was complete. It was both an escape hatch for Michael and a death sentence for his toxic marriage. With the will drafted and carefully notarized, the next step was to deploy it. I couldn't wait until I was gone. I had to enact it now, while I was still alive, to see its effects, to force the confrontation immediately. I called Michael. My voice was cool and businesslike. Michael, I need to see you and Amber. There are some important family financial matters that need to be clarified. Please be at Mr. Harrison's office at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning. Financial matters? Michael's voice was wary. What are you planning now? I thought we made it clear we are not leaving the house. You'll find out when you get here, I said. Oh, and bring Sophia and Liam. This concerns their future. Asking him to bring the children was a calculated move. I wanted them there, not to hear the sordid details, but for their innocent presence to be a tangible reminder to Michael of what was at stake, of the very future he had stolen. Thursday, 10 o'clock sharp. The whole family was present in Samuel's conference room. Michael was in a business suit, but he looked tired and anxious. Amber, on the other hand, was defiant. She wore a bright red designer dress, heavy makeup, and a cloak of false confidence like a suit of armor. Sophia and Liam sat quietly, looking confused to be dragged to a lawyer's office on a weekday morning. Samuel and I were already seated. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Thank you all for coming, Samuel began, his voice formal. We are here today at the request of my client, Mrs. Judith Miller, to announce some significant changes to her estate plan. Amber let out a small scoff. The estate again. Can't you just leave us alone? Samuel ignored her, his eyes fixed on Michael. It is Mrs. Miller's wish to establish a new last will and testament, and because its terms directly affect the future of everyone present, she wanted it read today. With that, he opened a handsome, leather-bound folder. He began to read, his voice slow and deliberate, each word a hammer blow against the silence. He read about the establishment of the Miller Future Trust. He read about Sophia and Liam being named the sole beneficiaries. As Samuel read that part, I saw Michael's brow furrow in confusion. Amber began to fidget. And then Samuel read the final, fatal clause. Michael Miller will only benefit from this trust under the sole condition that he finalizes a divorce from Mrs. Amber Collins within 6 months. The air in the room froze. I watched Michael's face go from confused to pale, then flush with anger. Amber's mouth fell open, the confidence shattering like glass. Even Sophia and Liam, who didn't understand the legal jargon, could feel the seismic shift in the room. A long silence stretched out, and then Amber broke it. She shot to her feet, slamming her hands on the table, making the documents jump. What is this? This is illegal. She's lost her mind. Samuel, are you helping this senile old woman turn against her own family? She whirled on me, her eyes blazing. You are a wicked, evil woman. Michael stood up, more slowly. He didn't look at Samuel, or at Amber. He stared at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hurt, outrage, and utter disbelief. You're destroying my marriage? His voice trembled, not with a yell, but with a wounded question. You're using your money to force me to leave my wife? How could you be so cruel to your own son? I met his gaze. I didn't flinch. For the first time in years, I felt no need to placate him, no guilt for upsetting him. I'm not destroying anything, Michael, I replied, my voice as cold as ice but steady as a rock. You and your wife already destroyed it. You destroyed my trust. You destroyed your father's legacy. I paused, glancing at Sophia and Liam, who were cowering in their chairs. And worst of all, you destroyed your own children's future when you stole their college money. My final sentence landed like a bomb in the silent room. Michael froze, the color draining from his face. He turned to Amber, a look I had never seen before, a look of pure suspicion. Amber avoided his gaze, her face ashen. Samuel's luxurious conference room had suddenly become an ice cavern. The air was so thick you could slice it with a knife. My final words, "You stole their college money," hung between us like an unspoken verdict. Sophia and Liam, my poor grandchildren, felt the weight of those words even if they didn't understand the details. Sophia, my sensitive 17-year-old granddaughter, looked from me to her parents, her big eyes welling with tears. Liam just stared at the floor, his small hands clenched together. Their presence was both a torment and a necessity. They needed to be there, so Michael couldn't deny the tangible consequences of his actions. Michael was stunned. He looked like a boxer who'd taken a surprise hook to the jaw, completely staggered. He whipped his head toward Amber, and for the first time, I saw him look at his wife not with adoration or submission, but with a demand for an explanation. College money? Amber, what is she talking about? Amber, cornered, stammered. She's lying. She's making things up to drive us apart. Don't believe her, Michael. She tried to take his hand, but he pulled it away. I looked directly at Amber, my voice devoid of emotion. Am I lying, Amber? Is the $40,000 that vanished from Sophia and Liam's trust fund just a figment of my imagination? Is the vacation condo in Clearwater, Florida, that you two purchased in cash 8 months ago also something I just made up? Every detail I revealed was another hammer blow to Amber's flimsy defense. Her face went from white to a sickly gray. She couldn't scream anymore. She could only stare at me with a look of pure hatred and panic. Michael completely crumbled. He stumbled back a step, hit the chair behind him, and collapsed into it. Florida? A condo? Amber, you said that was your commission from a big deal, he mumbled, speaking to her but also to himself. The entire world he had believed in, the entire narrative of his successful wife that he had been so proud of, was dissolving before his eyes. Samuel, who had remained silent, now spoke. His voice was formal and commanding, allowing no interruption. All evidence of the financial transactions, Mrs. Miller has just mentioned, has been fully collected and verified by an independent third party. They include bank statements, property records, and all related documents. He paused, looking directly at Michael and Amber. I must be clear so you both understand. These actions are not just a violation of a trust. They constitute felony fraud, a very serious criminal offense. It was then that Amber found her voice again, but it wasn't a defiant shout. It was a desperate, screeching hiss. She shot up, pointing a trembling finger at me. This is all your fault. You evil old witch. You were jealous of our happiness. You never wanted to see your son have his own life. You're trying to destroy everything. Michael remained seated, his head in his hands. He didn't defend her. His silence was more damning than any accusation. I stood up and slowly walked toward Amber. I stopped directly in front of her, only a few feet between us. I could see the fear dancing in her eyes. Jealous? I said, my voice low and clear, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Let me tell you what I'm jealous of. I'm jealous of your shamelessness. I'm jealous of your ability to sleep soundly at night after deceiving everyone who ever loved you. I'm jealous of the audacity it takes to sit in my house, spend my money, and then turn around and humiliate me on the internet. I took another step, so close I could smell her expensive perfume, the one probably bought with my money. You say I'm destroying my son's marriage? No, Amber. You destroyed him. You turned a good man into a thief and an accomplice. You poisoned him with your lies and your greed. You don't love him. You love what he could provide, and when that wasn't enough, you had no problem stealing from his mother and his own children. And now, I concluded, my voice like ice. The game is over. You have nowhere left to hide. Everyone in this room, including your husband, has now seen you for what you really are. Amber stumbled back, as if struck by an invisible blow. She looked to Michael for rescue. Michael, say something. You can't let her talk to me like this. Michael slowly lifted his head. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. He didn't look at Amber. He looked at me. And in his eyes, I saw a storm of emotions. Anger, shame, guilt, and above all, a crushing despair. You're destroying my marriage? He repeated his earlier question, but this time, the outrage was gone, replaced by pure pain. You're using your money to force me to leave my wife? How could you be so cruel to your own son? This was the moment. I knew my answer would decide everything. I looked deep into his eyes, trying to convey all the truth and all my pain in that single gaze. No, Michael, I'm not being cruel. I'm doing what I should have done years ago. I'm giving you a choice you've never had." "Shut up!" Amber suddenly shrieked, her shrill voice cutting me off. She pointed a finger directly at my face, her panic twisting into brazen aggression. "Stop making things up. Everything you're saying is a lie. You're doing all of this because you're jealous. You're jealous that Michael loves me more than you. You couldn't stand to see your son happy with someone else, so you're trying to tear us apart." She turned to Michael, her voice breaking into a perfectly orchestrated sob. "Don't listen to her, Michael. Can't you see? She's manipulating you. Your children and I love you. We're a happy family." I didn't respond to Amber. I didn't even glance at her. My eyes were locked on Michael, and only him. I knew that arguing with Amber now was pointless. This fight wasn't between me and her. The real war was taking place inside my son's head. "I trust you can see it, Michael," I said, my voice soft but heavy with meaning. "After everything that's happened, from your lies to me, to your blind faith in this marriage, you're not just avoiding the truth about her. You're avoiding the truth about yourself." That sentence seemed to strike a deep nerve. He went still, the chaos in his eyes sharpening into a strange focus. I saw a flicker of recognition. He understood. He understood that his blindness wasn't just love. It was his own cowardice, his fear of facing the fact that he was wrong, that he had let his life be led down the wrong path. "You've been living in a web of lies for so long," I pressed on, delivering another blow. "Your wife spun it and you willingly walked into it. I'm not forcing you to leave her. I'm just telling you that you can't have both. You can't have the security and the legacy of this family, and also have a wife who has proven she will trample all over it." I took a breath, softening my tone slightly. "This isn't a punishment, Michael. This is an escape route. I'm giving you a chance to start over. A chance to be the man your father always wanted you to be. An honest man, a responsible man, a man who puts the future of his children first." I glanced over at my grandchildren. "Their future, Michael. That's what matters most. You can choose to stay with the woman who stole that future, or you can choose to fight to get it back for them." There was nothing more to say. I had laid all the cards on the table. Silence enveloped the room. All eyes were on Michael. The weight of a family, of a past and a future, now rested entirely on his shoulders. He sat there, motionless, for what felt like an eternity. His face twitched, a violent internal struggle playing out. He glanced at Amber, who was watching him with a look of pleading mixed with a threat. He looked at Sophia and Liam, who were watching him with fear and confusion. Finally, he looked at me, a look that held agony, but also a sliver of release. Then he stood up. He didn't say a word. He just quietly walked over to his children, bent down, and took their hands. "Let's go home," he said, his voice raspy. He led the children toward the door, walking past Amber as if she didn't exist. "Michael!" Amber screamed, her voice thick with panic. "Where are you going? You can't just leave me here." Michael stopped at the door, but didn't turn around. "I need to think," he said, and then he opened the door and walked out, taking his children and the future of our family with him. Amber was left standing alone in the middle of the room, stunned. As the door clicked shut, her panic morphed into rage. She spun toward me, her eyes blazing. "What have you done? Are you insane?" I looked at her calmly. "You have no right to question me here, Amber." Samuel Harrison stood up then, his imposing figure like a wall of steel. "Mrs. Collins, I believe this meeting is concluded." "You can't just kick me out," she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "You're mistaken," I said, my voice like ice. "This is my attorney's office. And you, a person who has committed multiple felonies, are not welcome here for another second." Samuel signaled to a security guard who had been waiting just outside the door. The large man stepped inside. "Mrs. Collins, please come with me." Amber shot me one last look of pure hatred, a look that promised revenge. But for now, she was beaten. She knew it. She angrily snatched her designer handbag and stormed out of the room, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. The reading of the judgment was over. The bomb had been detonated. Now, all I could do was wait to see where the pieces would fall and whether, in the wreckage, anything worth saving could be found. Michael didn't call me. Neither did Amber. I heard nothing from them for the next 3 days. Those 3 days felt like 3 centuries. I tried to keep busy, reading, tending to the small garden on my balcony, but my mind was a whirlwind. What would Michael do? Was his blind love for Amber strong enough to make him defy everything, to give up his inheritance and his children's future? Or was the raw truth I had exposed powerful enough to pull him from the mire? I didn't have to wonder for long. On the evening of the third day, there was a knock on my apartment door. Not a ring of the bell, but a soft, almost timid knock. My heart hammered in my chest. I looked through the peephole and saw a familiar figure. It was Michael. He was alone. I took a deep breath and unlocked the door. My son stood there, under the sallow yellow light of the hallway. He looked terrible. His business suit was rumpled as if he'd been sleeping in it for 3 days. A rough stubble covered his gaunt face. His eyes were red and swollen, not from crying, but from a lack of sleep and an abundance of stress. He was no longer the polished, confident financial manager. He was just a broken man. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. Can I come in?" I said nothing, just stepped back and opened the door wider. He walked in, carrying an aura of defeat and regret with him. He stood awkwardly in the middle of my small living room, looking around like a stranger. "Sit down, Michael," I said, my voice softer than I'd intended. My anger had evaporated, leaving only a lingering sadness. No mother could stay hard-hearted looking at her son in this state. He sat on the edge of the armchair, his back ramrod straight, as if he didn't deserve to be comfortable. I poured him a glass of water and set it on the table. His hand trembled as he reached for it. A long silence stretched between us. I sat across from him, waiting patiently. This was his battle, and he had to be the one to start. Finally, he spoke, his eyes still fixed on the floor. "I haven't been home for 3 days." I nodded. "I know. I've been at a hotel. I needed to think. Alone." He looked up at me then, and I saw the utter chaos in his eyes. "Mom, the things you said about the trust fund, the condo in Florida, was it all true?" "Yes, Michael," I answered, my voice steady. "It was all true, and you know it." He dropped his head into his hands, running his fingers through his messy hair. A pained groan escaped his throat. "I know. I knew, but I didn't want to know. I chose not to see it. It was so much easier to just believe what she said. And then, like a dam breaking, it all poured out." He told me what happened after they left the lawyer's office. A horrific argument had erupted right there in the car, in front of the children. Amber had dropped the act. She had screamed, cursed, called me a manipulative old hag, and called Michael a weak, spineless man. She admitted to everything, not with remorse, but with a brazen anger. "Yes, I used the money," she had screamed at Michael, "because you're not man enough to give me the life I deserve, because I have to take care of things myself. What do you think my followers would say if I didn't have those things?" "She talked about her followers," Michael said to me, his voice filled with disgust. "She was more worried about strangers on the internet than the future of her own children." That night, after the kids were in bed, their fight reached its climax. Amber, realizing she couldn't win him back with affection, switched to threats and manipulation. "You are not listening to her," she had snarled, pacing the living room like a caged animal. "We'll sue. We'll say she's incompetent. That house is rightfully ours. We've lived there for 15 years. We have rights." Michael, for the first time, didn't stay silent. He stood up to her, the exhaustion in his eyes replaced by a cold fury. "Sue with what, Amber?" he had growled. "With the evidence of my mother's forged signature? We'll go to jail. Don't you get it? We are $250,000 in debt. Sophia and Liam's college money is gone." "It was family money," Amber had argued nonsensically. "We were just borrowing it." "Borrowing?" Michael had almost screamed, the desperation in his voice palpable. "Then where did it go, Amber? How much does your influencer business actually make? Show me." In a fit of frantic energy, he had grabbed Amber's tablet from the coffee table. She lunged for it, but it was too late. Michael, a financial manager by trade, tore through the banking apps, the investment accounts, the very things he had long ago trusted his wife to manage. And then he saw it. The final, devastating truth, worse than anything I had told him. He froze, the tablet slipping from his fingers onto the thick rug. His face was a mask of pure, bloodless shock. Amber wasn't just a spendthrift, she was a gambling addict. My son discovered a history of catastrophic losses on high-risk stock trades and cryptocurrency investments he knew nothing about. Tens of thousands of dollars gone in months. Worse, to cover her losses, she had secretly opened 2 more credit cards in his name, racking up nearly $30,000 in additional debt. Michael completely broke. He sank onto the sofa, staring into nothing. The entire foundation of his life, his career, his family, his love, it was all one colossal lie. He looked up at Amber, and there was no love left in his eyes. No anger, just a hollow, empty disgust. "You didn't just betray my mother," he said, his voice terrifyingly flat. "You betrayed me, and you betrayed our children. You turned me into a thief, a fool, and a debtor." He stood up and walked toward her. "My mother gave me a choice," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "But the truth is, you never gave me one at all." "The next morning I packed a bag," he continued, telling me the story. "I told her it was over. She went crazy. She threw things, threatened to ruin me, to tell everyone I was abusive, to take the kids and never let me see them. But I didn't back down," he said, and I saw a flicker of strength in his tired eyes. I just looked at her and said, "Go ahead, Amber. You can take everything, but you can't take the truth. And the truth is, you're a fraud, and I'm done being your fool." I listened to my son's story with a storm of emotions in my own heart. A part of me felt a grim satisfaction, but a much larger part felt a profound sadness. Sad for my son, for wasting 15 years of his life on someone so unworthy. Sad for my grandchildren, for growing up in such a toxic environment. And sad for myself, for having to resort to such extreme measures to wake my son up. Michael stood up and went to the window, looking out into the night. "I met with my own lawyer this morning. I filed for divorce." He turned to look at me. "Mom, I'm not doing this for the money. I don't care about the will. I'm doing this for Sophia and Liam, and for myself. I can't live like this anymore." He walked over to me, and then he did something he hadn't done since he was a little boy. He knelt down, he buried his head in my lap, and began to cry. Not quiet sobs, but deep, ragged gulps of air, the sound of a man who had lost everything but had, in the process, found himself again. I wrapped my arms around his shaking shoulders. I patted his back, just like I used to when he'd fall off his bike or get a bad grade. My own tears began to fall. Tears of relief, of forgiveness, and of a mother's love that, however battered, never truly dies. "Get up, son," I whispered. "Get up. It's going to be okay." He looked up, his face streaked with tears. "How can it be okay, Mom? I hurt you. I let her hurt you. I've been a terrible son." I wiped his tears away with my thumb. "You made mistakes, Michael. Very big mistakes. But what matters isn't that we fall down, it's that we get back up. And today, you got back up. It's going to be hard," I continued. "The divorce will be messy. Amber won't go quietly, and you'll have to face the consequences of the debt you're in. But you won't face it alone. I'll be here, and we'll figure it out together." He nodded, a look of immense gratitude in his weary eyes. The choice had been made. Michael had chosen family. He had chosen his children's future. My will, my judgment, had served its purpose. It hadn't been an instrument of division, but ultimately a catalyst for healing. A painful surgery, but one necessary to remove the cancer and save the patient. That night, when Michael knelt and cried in my lap, became a landmark, dividing our lives into a before and an after. Nothing that followed was easy. Life isn't a movie where all problems are solved with a hug and a few tears. The divorce between Michael and Amber was, as I predicted, a messy and ugly battlefield. Amber fought like a cornered animal. She hired a sharp, ruthless lawyer who tried to smear Michael in every way possible. She accused him of emotional abuse, of infidelity, of every sin under the sun. She demanded full custody and a massive alimony settlement. She tried to paint herself as a pitiable single mother being crushed by a wealthy and cruel family. But she forgot one thing. We had the truth, and we had the proof. Samuel Harrison, with the calm demeanor of an old general, dismantled every one of her baseless accusations. When her lawyer claimed Michael was financially unstable, Samuel presented the records of the $230,000 mortgage and the Florida condo in Amber's name. When she painted herself as a devoted mother, Samuel produced the evidence of the embezzled college funds. Finally, when Amber refused to negotiate, I was forced to play my last ace, the sealed addendum to the will. Samuel sent a copy of Patricia Wells's entire investigative file to Amber's lawyer with a short note. Our client is prepared to forego pursuing criminal charges against Mrs. Collins for fraud and embezzlement in exchange for a swift and reasonable divorce settlement. This offer is valid for 48 hours. That was the kill shot. Faced with the very real possibility of years in prison, Amber finally laid down her arms. She agreed to a settlement that left her with almost nothing. She received no alimony. The house in Naperville was returned fully to me. The Florida condo was sold to pay back the bank. She was granted only supervised weekend visitation with the children. The day the final hearing concluded, Michael and I walked out of the courthouse together. The Chicago sky was gray and drizzling, but I felt a strange sense of peace. Michael looked thinner, with a few new silver strands in his hair, but there was a strength in his posture I hadn't seen in a long time. "It's over, Mom," he said, his voice tired but full of relief. "Yes, it's over, son," I replied. "Now it's time to begin again." And we did, one step at a time. Michael, with my help, packed up his and the children's belongings and moved out of the Naperville house. That house, with its painful memories, needed to be cleansed. I decided not to sell it. I would have it renovated, repaint those cold gray walls with the warm colors of the past, and keep it as a legacy for Sophia and Liam. In the meantime, Michael and the kids moved in with me. My small apartment was suddenly crowded and noisy, but it was the noise of life, of healing. For the first time in years, I was cooking family dinners again. We ate together at the small kitchen table, sharing stories from our day. Sophia would help me with the dishes. Liam would argue with his imaginary grandfather about a baseball game. And Michael would just sit there watching quietly, and every now and then, I'd catch him smiling, a real, genuine smile. The healing process wasn't a straight line. There were days Michael was consumed with guilt and regret. There were nights I could hear him sighing in the living room. Sophia and Liam had their own struggles, the sadness of a broken home, the awkwardness of explaining to their friends where their mother had gone. But we had each other. We talked. A lot. I told the kids stories about the good memories they had with their father when they were younger, to let them know the dad they loved was still in there. He had just been lost for a while. I talked to Michael, not as a judge, but as a mother. I listened to him, validated his pain, and helped him forgive himself. "Mom," he said one evening, as we were watching an old movie together, "I'm sorry. I know I've said it 100 times, but I am truly sorry for everything." I turned to look at him. "I know, Michael, and I've forgiven you, but more importantly, have you forgiven yourself?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm working on it, Mom. Every day." That was all I needed to hear. A few months later, Michael found a rental apartment near me, big enough for the three of them. The day they moved out was both happy and sad. My apartment was quiet again, but it was no longer the quiet of loneliness. It was the quiet of peace. Our relationship has changed. It's no longer a one-way street of giving and taking. We've become allies, friends. He brings the kids over for dinner regularly. We go to Liam's baseball games together. We went to see Sophia's school play. We have rebuilt our family, not on the foundation of what we lost, but on what we found: honesty, respect, and a love that is conditional, its condition being kindness. Now, as I sit here in the quiet of my apartment, I often think about the journey I've been on. I used to think old age was a time for rest, for quiet contentment, but life taught me another lesson. Old age, my friends, is when we have the wisdom and the strength to face the truths we were too scared or too busy to look at when we were young. I lost a daughter-in-law and nearly lost my son. But in return, I found myself again. I found Judith Miller, the strong woman who refuses to be trampled on. I learned that patience is not always a virtue. Sometimes, silence is complicity, and that love does not mean accepting disrespect. True love demands honesty, no matter how painful that truth may be. I also learned that forgiveness is a two-way street. I forgave Michael, but more importantly, I learned to forgive myself for being too trusting, for being silent for too long. for not seeing the warning signs sooner. This war took much from me, but it also gave me priceless gifts. It gave me a new, deeper, and more honest relationship with my son. It gave me the chance to be close to my grandchildren, to be a stable rock in their turbulent lives. And most of all, it gave me peace. Not the peace of a still, undisturbed lake. It's the peace of an old sailor who has weathered the greatest of storms and knows that her ship, though scarred, is strong enough to carry on. I'm no longer afraid of the future. I no longer regret the past. I live fully in the present, in the loud Sunday dinners, in the check-in calls from Michael, in the fierce hugs from Sophia and Liam. My friends, if my story can leave you with one thing, I hope it is this. Never, ever underestimate your own strength at any age. Never let anyone else define your worth. And never be afraid to fight for the truth. Because in the end, justice isn't just some grand legal concept. Sometimes, justice is simply being able to live in peace and truth under your own roof. And that, my friends, is all I ever wanted. And it's what I have.